Hi, everyone. What you're about to see is the full interview with Faith and Ryan, two of the staff members at the Office of Adult Services, talking about everything that is going into supporting those with housing issues right now. This last week in worship, you saw a short clip of it as part of our Minute for Mission. This is the full sit down. It goes all over the place. It is fascinating, and I hope you watch it with an ear towards how we as a community can be of support to those in need with housing issues going forward. So please, enjoy.
Yeah. All right, so I'm Faith Ryan. I'm the Director of Adult Services with Center County Government.
And will you guys give us just a little overview of what things are like right now where you work and what you're seeing in the county around housing?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is really unique. The only way that I can really explain it is kind of the natural order of things is gone. And so while we're really pleased to see that there's an eviction moratorium, especially now that's extended till the end of the calendar year, it kind of crunches up the housing ladder. You know, whether it be people that may unfortunately have been naturally evicted, we've lost those units being open for people that need somewhere to go. A lot of people have gotten stuck, so they may have changed employment, they may have plans to have moved. Whatever life, was supposed to be has basically ceased, right, in a lot of ways. And so that really crams up the housing ladder. It crams up the natural order of how the housing in our area works. And so on one side, we're seeing a lot of people being able to stay in their home. We're very concerned for those that are not reaching out, that they're very behind on their rent and what that's gonna look like when the moratorium's up. But on the other hand, we have a lot of people that may have just gotten their Section 8 voucher, or they're trying to exit a program that they've been in for a year or two, and they cannot find an affordable unit because nothing has kind of moved, right? Like we've all been kind of stuck in the same place in a lot of ways for 6 months. I'd also say that we're seeing a very different population of people coming to us for help. We're seeing people that have never recognized their name before. They've always worked. They have never not paid their rent on the first of the month, and they're really scared and they're really anxious, and we have seen that fear really increase a lot just this month with having that pandemic assistance end. Granted, there is some more seemingly coming, but that was a really big shift for people, and unemployment usually is not sustainable enough for people to meet all of their expenses. So definitely a lot of anxiety, but we are starting to see some people that are unfortunately typically struggling anyway start to finally reach out for some help, and we really appreciate that because we don't want them to feel like they can't reach out during this time, and we want to be available for everybody.
How many people are affected when you talk about these things?
I think we're all affected in a different way. So what I tell people when I'm on the phone with them, when they're upset or they feel like they shouldn't get this help because somebody else needs it more, I tell them we all have our own COVID story, and it's all hard. And just because my story might seem harder than yours or vice versa, we're all having our own experience. So everybody's affected. That's the way I look at it. As far as housing, we have one new program that's COVID specific. It's our CARES Rent Relief Program. And we've received well over 160 applications since July 6th. We know that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are lots of landlords, or not lots, but some prominent landlords that are unwilling to work with the program. So we know they have a lot of units that people are unable to receive this service. We have a lot of people that don't understand how to fill out the paperwork, so we try to help them. There's just various barriers, but if anything, that's just a taste of what's going on, and it's a little scary to think about what the end of the year will look like.
How many folks come to you with housing needs or concerns in a quote-unquote normal time?
So like a normal month, we would serve anywhere from like 12 to 15 households with rental assistance. And that's really time consuming. We would meet with them in person, do an intake, do some negotiation with the landlord, and that would be about 50% of that position's time. So to think about the fact that we've had 160 plus households since July, we're getting about 20 applications a week and trying to process them as quickly as humanly possible at this point. And when I say 12 to 15 families, that only represents people that are actually eligible and receiving the assistance that we typically have. That does not include the families that we can't serve because we've run out of funding, and it doesn't include the families that come to us for other housing needs. So,
What would make some, can you describe a little bit about what the difference is between those who are eligible and those who are ineligible?
So in a normal circumstance, people would be ineligible for services if maybe they were over income, which is kind of rare. Most of the people coming to us are fairly lower income.
What is the income limit?
Sure, so we changed it for this fiscal year. It's now 200% of the federal poverty level for our rental and mortgage assistance program.
Which is how much, dollar-wise? Do you know?
I don't think I have that really accurately at the top of my head.
Uh-huh.
But we did increase that from 175%
Uh-huh.
because we wanted to be able to help and maximize our opportunity to help as many people as possible. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question again? I lost track of it.
What makes someone ineligible? You said that
ineligible.
over the income level.
Sometimes someone can be ineligible if we're concerned about their ability to be self-sufficient. So we are required to document that they are likely to be self-sufficient within a 90-day period. That is very variable. And my philosophy in the department is you help the person and just give them all the resources you can to make that happen. If we find that they become a chronic user or they're really just consistently unable to meet those types of goals, we might question whether or not our service is really helping, and we'll try to connect them with some other services like budget counseling or long-term case management, because it's clear that this is just a Band-Aid and we're not going to be able to, the bigger problem isn't getting resolved.
Are these generally families, or are they usually individuals, or is it a complete mix?
It's a complete mix. Yep. We probably have, for fiscal year 1920, I think we served close to 200 adults and close to that in children.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit, or describe for me a little bit about what it is like in your office right now. How many people are working in the Office of Adult Services that are feeling all this, and what is it like when you're there?
Oh man, don't put this in the video. It's like laugh crying. So typically we're an office of 3. So there's myself as the director, we have a housing program specialist, and we have an assistant director. I had gone on a parental leave at the very beginning of COVID. It was very poor timing. And came back to my housing program specialist had taken another position that was already kind of in the works pre-COVID, and then my assistant director had to go on medical leave and still remains on medical leave. So it was me. And it was hard enough then, but at the very end of June, so I had been in the department by myself for about a month, we got word from PHFA, or the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency, that they had this program, and please join us for a webinar. And we had 5 days to decide if we were going to take on this program, and I was told that there were $2.3 million allocated for our department, and my department budget's about $1.1 million. So just to kind of give you an idea of like the amount of money and the size and the weight of this program. So I was very, very fortunate to take some time to get to get on the ground running and figure out what I was dealing with. I was able to recruit through my supervisor and other fellow colleagues numerous Center County employees to help me. And we currently have a team of 10 people, including myself, and now including Pete, that help either process applications. They might help reassess eligibility for each month because we can't pay future rent. Some of them just help us do scanning and scan all these applications into the computer or onto our shared drive so we can all access it. It's quite an operation. It's an operation, and I couldn't be more grateful, but it's a little chaotic.
What is the biggest hurdle right now with getting these funds to the people who need them and helping them be as useful as possible?
The greatest challenge getting these particular funds, sort of the CARES dollars, we're finding that it's been really challenging for us to get applications. Our actual physical building is closed. We're all working remote and we're not permitted to allow the public in. That's specific to our location's landlord, not like a county policy, so to speak. So we have a lot of people that will end up going to the building and they want to drop their paperwork off or ask questions, and we're not available, and that's really, really hard. So we're relying on the USPS, the United States Postal Service, which, I have a lot of anxiety that things are getting lost. I have a lot of people calling me. I sent a month ago, where's my application? Some people send their applications to Harrisburg. I just got a text message from one of my case managers that there's one at her doorstep today. We've tried really hard to pump out information about where and how to apply and where to submit, and it's not getting out enough. So that's been really, really challenging. And then sometimes when we get the actual applications, they're incomplete, because this program is so unique in that it is the tenant and the landlord's responsibility to complete all the paperwork together as a team and submit it. Whereas we're typically accustomed to someone calling us, we do an intake in person, we help kind of guide and facilitate the experience. We negotiate with the landlord, we work very closely with the client, and then we ultimately make a decision and filter the funds out that way. We're almost like a county assistant's office. We are almost like your caseworker if you get SNAP benefits. You have to send us the income and all the materials, we'll process it and stamp that approval or denial. That's a really hard change, but we try to make it as human as possible. We've had a lot of people feel really grateful and sometimes even break into tears that we actually returned their call and gave them the time they needed because they're struggling. They ever tried to call unemployment? I tried to call the DMV once and it hung up on me. I get that. It's really scary.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then, in addition, they need the landlord to be able to be willing to sit down with them and figure this out with them and walk with them through the process as well.
Yeah, in a lot of instances, the tenant will provide the landlord with the application, or what's unique to this program as well is that the landlord can apply too, on behalf of them and the tenant. Just one party has to apply, but yes, the landlord has to complete some paperwork, they have to provide ownership documentation that they own the property, they have to have a lease available, and that's not typical for landlords. Typically, we work with the client, we call them, and we say, does this amount sound right? They say, yeah, we get a W-9, we send them a check.
How has landlord compliance and eagerness to work with their tenants been?
It's a mixed bag. I would say in the very beginning, it was very clear that a lot of our local landlords that maybe only have a couple of units were very willing. They recognized the max amount of $750 that we can provide, and they were happy to have that over zero. Because a lot of them are struggling to pay the taxes on the property. They're struggling to pay their own bills because that's their income. And so they've been very appreciative, fairly easy to work with, and understanding of our limitations too. We have struggled with a couple larger entities that have decided not to participate, and it's a little scary to think about what that will look like in the future, and what those residents are doing to get the help they need. But to be fair, there have been some other larger entities that have really just surprised me. They have come through and they're applying on behalf of their tenants. And they're willing to take the $750 even if the rent is a little bit higher because they recognize the benefit for everybody.
Where does the unwillingness from some of those large entities come from? Or what's the purpose? Why wouldn't they want to participate?
So this is just information I've gathered from tenants and also some direct landlords, and also it's a chronic issue across the state where the landlords or the larger corporations that are a little less willing to work with us do not like the language that says they can waive their rights to evict somebody for the balance. So we've even found it to be where we had one property that was willing to participate if the tenant's, rent was under $750. And then we've started to see them budge a little bit, because their rents are typically about that anyway. But with some of the properties that don't want to participate, it doesn't really seem to matter what the rent is. They just do not, my opinion is that I think they don't like the language. They don't like that legality part. They don't like feeling like their right is taken away. For us, it's really expensive to evict somebody, and ultimately what's going to happen is we're going to clog up the court system. And then what we're going to do is we're going to evict people for non-payment, and then you're going to house people in that same unit that got evicted for non-payment. It's just going to be this really unnecessary traumatic cycle. So that's something we really hope to prevent with this program too.
Without giving any names, of course, would you be able to just kind of give me a short story of a client that you've dealt with and what that's been like for them?
Yeah, so we had one client that came to us prior to COVID, or excuse me, it was during COVID, but it was prior to the opening of this program. And they were struggling because their children were actually removed from their home, from children and youth, and the only barrier they had to getting those kids returned was stable housing. And they were in a property with one of the landlords that was unwilling to participate. They both lost their jobs at the university, so they were employed. They've been trying to apply for any job, literally any job since, which a lot of people unfortunately are doing, and they just were having no luck. So they came to us prior to this program. We were able to assist them with a portion. We used our RAP program, and we packaged with other entities in the area to get that back rent paid. Well, the problem continued because they weren't eligible for unemployment, they couldn't get a job anywhere, and they literally could not get their kids home until they could pay that rent. And it was really hard even on CYS. Like, CYS was advocating for them as well. And we were all trying to work together to figure out how we could fix this. And so when this program came about, I called the caseworker and I said, look, like, there's this CARES Rent Relief program. I think they'd be a really good match. It won't cover all the rent, but maybe the landlord will work with us. And then at least it's 6 months. At least buys us 6 months to know that they'll be stable with their children. And then we got all ready for that, and the landlord was one of the landlords that didn't want to participate, and we got really stuck. We tried to submit like a FUP voucher or a family unification voucher for them, but the housing authority's response was, well, there's an eviction moratorium, so they're not at risk of losing their home. So we got stuck there. So we've gone pretty far into the community to help them.
What does that look like?
What's that?
What does that look like, going far into the community?
So when we started using the RAP dollars, we started with, when I say RAP, it's like our public dollars, and then we go out to private dollars. So we went to our case manager, that Elena at Center Helps, that you've sure talked to, or you've talked to Center Helps. And she packaged some funds through various agencies. When we continued to be stuck, she then went to an agency like St. Vincent de Paul. They'll sometimes go do a home visit. So they can provide even a bigger package than usual, and they did that. So that was kind of like the next step was beg, right? Like, this family's done literally everything. We don't know what else to do. And we kind of just got a little bit stuck. So that was tough. I'm not sure if the children were returned. I mean, I think the idea and the plan was to return them soon. But that was really hard because that was it. It wasn't anything else. It was just they didn't have stable housing. And these are people that lived in a clean home. It was a good size for their family. It wasn't like they were couch surfing or in a very different housing situation. They actually had they had a lease, and we just couldn't get that rent taken care of. That was hard.
On a purely human level, what is it, say, how are you and the staff doing in terms of like energy level and looking forward, and what is that like right now?
Sure. Exhausting. It's really exhausting. I say it not for pity, but I work constantly, and a lot of us work around the clock because there's just not enough time in the day, and you have to figure a lot of us also have families and small kids and other factors because of COVID going on in our household, so everything's just kind of chaos. I think that some members of our team that are helping specifically with this project certainly have a little more time or a little more energy than certainly myself. But I continue to look at the positive. Sometimes when I have a really bad day and I'm sitting at my computer and I just want to walk away, I'll write a really encouraging email to everybody. And I'll be like, guys, we put $120,000+ into the community just in August. It's awesome. Because 5 minutes ago, I was like, oh my gosh, we processed $120,000. Like, I was just looking at it exhausted, and I was looking at it negatively. And so if I'm able to spin it, that certainly seems to help. Certainly having Pete joining us 2 weeks ago, he's eager and excited. He's he's obviously shot out of a cannon here today. So he's a new level of energy that's certainly very appreciated. But like I said, we're tired, we're working around the clock. They're doing that in every department, it's not just mine. But I think the more as a leader that I can be positive and try to bring that positivity out, it certainly helps. The other thing I would say too, kind of on that human level, is I remember when this first started, many of us do, right? Like we remember that first moment that Governor Wolf said we're shutting down, that first moment when you heard this is a global pandemic, like what does that mean? Or like learning that my daycare for my children was closed. Like you just have that like moment of like, what does that actually mean? And I remember talking to my team, and this is also like outside agencies, and I was like, guys, for every month this goes on is 1 year of recovery. You need to think about that, because we were all in this mentality of like, it's only gonna be 2 weeks. It's not only gonna be 2 weeks. We know this. And even if it's only 2 weeks, we all watched our society collapse in 2 weeks. And that was of people that have resources. We work with people that have no resources. And so we're 6 months in, and I've accepted that for 6 years, this will be the impact. Somehow, some way, the fact that people have depleted their savings, that they're hanging by a thread, it's gonna take them so long to recoup all of that. So while that's a sad and semi-negative thing, it's real. And I think that helps case managers be like, okay, we're in this for the long haul. And the longer this goes on, the longer we're gonna feel it, but that's the real answer. I don't sugarcoat anything. The hope is that we can all work together. The hope is that we don't get competitive. The hope is that we can have more funds to help people, right? But I lived through all the mobile home closures back in 2012, and I thought that was just the worst time. That was a horrible time. There were 400 displaced families that we had to rehouse in Center County. Can you imagine? And I thought, wow, it can't get any worse. I think I might have been wrong, I'm not sure. But we're still feeling the effects of that. A lot of those families are still really unstable. Not all of them, but many. Many of them have moved to other trailer parks that are now being threatened to close. And it's just like the nightmare never ends for them. And that was 8 years ago.
If you could wave a magic wand that would create realistic results, what does the realistic but magic community support look like for these families and for your office?
Yeah, sure. So for our office is always grace. I think the community has been very graceful and grateful, understanding that we're under a lot of pressure and we're working as fast and effectively as possible to help, that we want to collaborate with you, we want to find new solutions. That's what I would hope the community knows about the Office of Adult Services. As far as waving a magic wand and what the community can do, obviously getting the word out, talking with your congregations, talking with people individually that you know are struggling, encourage them not to be too prideful to come out and get help, because now is the time. And that's what I tell them, now is the time. This particular funding that we have will be gone at the end of the calendar year. We don't know if it's gonna come back. So if you need it now, please take it. Please come and work with us, and we'll do everything we can. If we can't serve you with the COVID funding that we have, we'll find some other way to help you. The other thing I really want to push out there is we have a very large population of undocumented families in our community, especially right in, say, College Borough. A lot of them are not eligible for government funding for a variety of reasons, mostly their citizenship, mostly because it would penalize them from ever becoming a citizen. Understandably, a lot of them are really afraid to even get close to a government building, and I don't blame them, but they're struggling. I know the school district has been paying a lot of their rent like all summer long. We've been pulling together private dollars to pay their rents, and we're kind of running out of some options. We have a couple in our back pocket, but that's just for the near future, right?
Is there a way that private entities or organizations can help that population? Because obviously your office and the school district can't tell you who these people are or where they are, no matter what your intentions are.
So right now, they are working primarily with Center Helps. And we have a plan in place, at least in my department, to do our very best in a very creative way to get some additional funding to them to try and help these families. But as far as like where donations could go, or if it's something specific, or working with Center Helps to set up like a pot of money specific to those families, they will honor that. And being able to have a pot of private dollars they can pull from as needed is incredibly valuable. To not have to make a bunch of phone calls to put $200 together, $200 together here, and just pull what they need for this family's rent. Lots of families, lots of little kids, lots of them in the school district. They all work in our food service. Many of them can't get back to work. You know, and we're really stuck with that. And we want to help them. We're just trying to figure out how we can do it. And like I said, I think we have a plan in place to at least help for a short period of time, just because of the amount of money available. But we know that, like, just because January 1st, 2021 comes doesn't mean this all changes. Like, that magic wand isn't going to happen. So if I'm going to advocate for any group, it would be that group. Absolutely.
One more time.
So my name is Pete Kurtz-Globus. I'm the Housing Program Specialist at the Center County Office of Adult Services. And right now that means I'm doing a lot of assisting with the CARES program, helping people find rent relief through that program, as well as assisting with the Family Unification Program, the RAP program, and Section 811 housing.
How would you love to see community support for the folks that you are working with directly?
The people that I'm working with right now, I'm new to the work, so I'm still learning like who this population is, but what I am seeing, similar to what Faith said, is that there is a large amount of variation between the clients that we're serving. So I guess out of that, what I'd like to see from the community is to kind of first inspect some of their ideas about what homelessness or instability might look like, and kind of examine that and work through it, and realize that a lot of the folks that we're serving are actually very similar to us, very similar to our neighbors. They live in our community, they work alongside us, they go to our schools, and examining that and understanding that they deserve as much assistance as we can provide them, because when we're helping them, we're also helping our community thrive.
If a church wanted to be an anti-homeless church, how can they support people well before they get to your agency?
One thing that they could do is they could create a work group or some kind of, what do churches call it?
A missionary group?
Yeah, like something like that is directly engaged in the broader community. Maybe get involved with some of the local coalitions. And just by starting there and joining the conversation, you start to learn a little bit more about more direct service opportunities. And that can look like, depending on where you are and what the population looks like, you could do a Saturday afternoon lunch that's available to anybody who wants it. It can also look like a lot of different things. It could be creating a child care program that serves at-risk or actively homeless folks so that the parents can go to work. It can look like all kinds of things, but really that first step is just joining those coalitions and joining in the conversation and learning what kind of creative approaches the church might be able to bring to those folks.
Is it safe to say that one of the greatest barriers to safe and full-time and secure housing is full-time and available employment?
That's a good question. I can't speak directly for this community. I usually argue that the biggest barrier to housing is the availability of housing itself. I believe that there are ways that we can make housing more affordable and more available to folks across the income spectrum. So if there's somebody who's only earning 30% or less than the area median income, which I think in Center County is about $62,000 a year, something like that. It's not helpful if they're earning 30% less than that. Maybe they're earning that from disability income that they receive, and they physically and legally can't be working. 30% of 62,000 isn't going to get you into many apartments in the area. So I do think work is a big part of it, but a lot of the folks that I have seen who are living on a restricted income, they don't have that option of working, even if they want to. And in my previous work, I have seen people who are actively homeless or at risk of homelessness who come to me and they tell me, I want to be working. I found this restaurant that'll let me work in their kitchen. And oftentimes I have to tell them, if you start doing that and you can only commit to 15 hours a week, you're going to lose your disability income and then you can't make rent. And it's a really difficult kind of balance that you have to find there. Now, some folks can do one or the other, or some folks can even do both. But a lot of times there are restrictions there on how often you can work. And the restrictions are there because there is a reason why those folks can't work. Usually it's a physical disability or a learning disability that's developed over time. So.
Can you speak to any relationship between the level of family and community support an individual family might have versus their vulnerability to homelessness? Is there a direct correlation that, if they have lots of family around, or if they're part of an organization, or they have, they've lived in a community a long time, are they less likely to be dealing with threats of homelessness, or are the issues just larger than that?
Yeah, I think it does vary by community, but typically if you're looking at somebody who has, I believe what we call natural supports, it's a connection to, deep connections to community or to family, or even just friends and neighbors that they can rely on and talk to. Like, so if somebody's been without a job for 2 months and then school lets out, but they find out that they have an interview, just being able to go to their neighbor and say, hey, can you watch my daughter for 2 hours so I can go interview downtown? Little things like that. And we do know that when those connections are removed for whatever reason, then that's when families and individuals start to rely more on the structural supports that are around them, so whatever that might look like. I do think that in some areas of the country, and maybe in some areas of this county as well, there is a disparity between the total income available to the community and what a natural support might do in that situation. So, for example, right now, if no one has income and if everyone is struggling, there's only so much that those natural supports can do. They don't do nothing. There's always a benefit to it. But in times like this, it's so important to have those structural supports that can intervene.
If you guys are a structural support, right, and you have this flood of clients, but there's also a flood of resources that are coming in right now, are there other structural supports that are not seeing that flood of resources and they need additional support in other ways? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I would defer to you on that. I don't know the full county landscape yet.
I'm trying to think of a really good, a good example.
Yeah.
I feel like access to food might be something. I don't know. But I don't know if that's even a...
Yeah, so I get asked about food a lot because my belief with food assistance, especially from natural supports or just community assistance, is that's the easiest thing for us to do and the thing that we can all really relate to. I've been through times where I've had a surgery and it was so nice when someone did a meal train for me, or I can't imagine if I opened my refrigerator and there was no food, right? In some primitive way we can all understand how important food is. When you get to things like housing, daycare, racism, and anything work-related, or any type of
medical care.
Yeah, kind of going up the line of disparity, right? Or being a minority in some way, we start to detach if we can't relate. So food is always the first thing people do. And I would say in Center County, we're in pretty good shape. Our food pantries are well stocked. We've received a lot of additional funding. The YMCA does a fantastic job. Even the State College School District in particular, I don't know what's speaking for them, but they do free meals for kids. So we're in pretty good shape with that. I think the things that, what I actually like that Pete talked about was really the daycare piece, big time. I realize we're in a unique situation where it's can we even open the door right now? But in normal times, that's still a really big issue. And one of the things that we find for the CCIS or the ERLC, the Early Learning Resource Center, any type of state funding, the parent or parents have to at least be working or in school for 20 hours a week. And so then it becomes a chicken and the egg thing. Well, what comes first? How do I go and get a job, or how do I start this semester without childcare, but I can't get childcare until I do it? So having some more opportunities or some more places to bridge that gap, where maybe that's where the community support comes in and it's structural and it doesn't have enough support and funding, to just so where eventually maybe the parent can get that funding and the daycare can get the full payment, but having some sort of like other type of subsidy in the meantime. Like that would make a really big impact for people. We could talk about the availability of affordable housing in Center County all day long. We know that there are challenges there, but I think we're definitely seeing how hard it is for families when there's no childcare. I think a lot about like schools, and we have to recognize that like for a lot of kids in our county and for across the country, like school is respite. Home isn't always the best place. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're going through like the worst form of abuse you could ever imagine. But as Pete talked about earlier, like people are really stressed out. I admittedly am way too stressed out in front of my own kids. Like that has an impact. And so, we're seeing how important that is. And when we can come together as a group and maybe have pots, or we can do things together as that natural support, that's really helpful. But when you brought up daycare, I was like, yes. That is a really big issue in our community.
And I mean, especially like pre-elementary childcare, I think is so important. Especially there's this, there is a national kind of group of people who believe in this idea of like picking yourself up by your bootstraps, but you can't reach your bootstraps if you got a baby in your hands. There's other things that we have to take care of before we can even hope that a family or an individual can then become financially independent, or at least financially self-reliant.
Yeah. And Pete, you have the benefit of having lots of experiences in other places before coming here. Do you have any stories of really creative solutions or initiatives that you've seen either churches or other community groups or just community members do that worked?
Like creative interventions for homelessness?
Yeah.
Specifically? Yeah. I think before I moved here this summer, I was living in Seattle for 7 years, since 2013. And I began working in this field around the same time, and when I really started to hit my stride was when Seattle declared a declaration of emergency around homelessness. Some of the things that I saw that really worked were, in that space, one of the bigger problems was the income disparity, right? So median income in King County right now is $100,000, which is huge. So if you're earning 30 grand, you are considered very low income in that community. But there were ways that organizations found that they could utilize different land that was available to them and procure that through a variety of different legal mechanisms. And sometimes those would be turned into tiny home communities, which, some people believe that a tiny home is not actually a real home. However, coming from that community, I think it's a lot better than having folks sleeping in tents. So there's a lot of structure to it. There was great community outreach from different nonprofits in the area. So friends of mine who worked as case managers would actually go out to those communities. We also had folks who were going out to places where people were literally camping, and there was an entire program devoted to approaching people who were living out of their cars. My understanding is that in rural Pennsylvania, car camping is a lot more common. A lot of folks who do it don't even consider themselves homeless, although they do count in the national homeless count that happens each year for anybody who's receiving national funding. So I think just being able to think about, identifying what do we actually think of as homelessness. Now in Center County, I don't think you're going to get a ton of people who are sleeping under bridges or sleeping in tents behind the Walmart. But you probably have some folks that are sleeping in vans, sleeping in RVs, in places that maybe don't have an RV hookup, or even doubled up. And just finding the ways to reach those folks and first identify what their barriers are. So is it income? Is it access to housing? Is it substance use disorder or something like that? And then finding ways to navigate those problems. But it really starts just at that outreach level.
What really got me interested in housing and how churches can be involved in that is I worked in a church in New Jersey, and at one point they realized they needed a new roof, but they had no money for a new roof. And they had a congregation member who had foster children and was very concerned about children aging out of foster care because their child was just about to. And they realized that there are funds for creating more supportive housing for mainly women aging out of foster care. And eventually they, instead of buying a new roof, built supportive housing on top of their church,
Wow.
which was a creative
That's
solution.
cool.
Yeah.
And then this is right around the time that the Iraq War, soldiers were just starting to come back, and we realized they were coming back with a lot of issues. And there was an Episcopal church down the street that had been closed down for a number of years. And so kind of in the expertise they learned from that, realized that they could reimagine what that church would be. So they took over that church and turned it into affordable housing, and ended up creating an organization that I worked for a while. But it's just fascinating that there are possibilities out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we just need communities willing to do a little grind to find them and create them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do think that most people, regardless of political affiliation in our country, want to help to some degree. And I've seen in-kind donations from all sorts of people that want to work for like Habitat for Humanity and just help to build a house. And if you can source the lumber and source the labor, a lot of times you can get things built without much money at all. You find a couple people that just have a good heart and they want to help out. And what you can accomplish with that alone is pretty incredible.
Pete, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
I think one of the biggest things that can help with homelessness, and I learned this firsthand in Seattle, is identifying ways that funds can be adequately gathered and then distributed throughout the community. And in Washington State, there's no income tax, period. And what that resulted in was a huge lack of publicly available funding to actually solve homelessness. I do understand that there is an income tax in Pennsylvania, and I think that's great, but really understanding that our taxes don't just disappear or go nowhere or go to politicians, but a progressive tax structure actually does result in direct community supports for folks that need it.
And so maybe community support also means political advocacy.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you both very, very much.